What's going on, everybody? Mr. Dramus here. I wanted to make a quick video for students and parents in the community out there to talk a little bit about the middle school pathways. Now, specifically, how we organize and follow through and execute with the pathways for your child in this school, in home middle school locally. So I'm going to bring up this PowerPoint and I'm going to talk you through kind of the ways that we envision students walking through the pathway and abilities to maybe jump a pathway, stay on the same pathway, or just kind of communicate with your teachers on where your child stands in terms of mathematics. So let's go ahead and look at that for a second. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger, right? And bear with me, I was doing the open house presentation, so I want to make this a little bit easier for you to see. Okay, so let's take a look at this, and hopefully you can see it okay. And actually, let's do this so you can see me too. Okay, I was going to say, goodness gracious, where am I? Here I am. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look from the very beginning. All right, so when your child comes to home middle school and they are in 6th grade math, right, there are two choices or two pathways that kick off middle school here at Hull. And that is they're in standard math for 6th grade, which teaches all of the 6th grade content. Okay, it's the entire year of 6th grade math. Or your child might be in accelerated 6th grade math. Now, a lot of that has to be kind of predetermined from their elementary school days and 5th grade specifically, but that's kind of out of my scope. So we'll just take it from beginning of middle school to the end of middle school and then the first year of high school. Okay. So then the other pathway, like I was talking about, is accelerated 6th grade math. That is all of 6th grade content and half of the year of 7th grade. So it's the first half of 7th grade. So as you can see, accelerated means it's still all the stuff that you'd get normally for your child, but it's got to be the first half of 7th grade material. Okay. Now, the blue arrows indicate the natural progression, the typical progression for a student. So let's go ahead and do that from 6th to 7th, and then I'll explain the green arrow. So if your child is in standard 6th grade math, the natural progression would be to go to standard 7th grade math, which teaches all of 7th grade content. Now, last year was the first year of Algebra 1 for all. So what the 7th grade teachers are doing now is they are teaching the important concepts, the most important concepts from 8th grade material at the end of the year in 7th grade to kind of give your child a boost and a little bit of kick so they can get into 8th grade and have a good understanding of the most important concepts. Okay? If your child was in accelerated 6th grade math, the natural progression would be to go to accelerated 7th grade math. Okay? Now that is the second half or the remaining half of the 7th grade material, and it's all of 8th grade material. Okay? There are a lot of units in the accelerated curriculum overall, so a lot more than the standard curriculum because they have to account for the next half of a school year. So that would be the natural progression from 6th to 7th grade. Now, the green arrow that you see between 6th and 7th indicates a likely or a possible pathway jump. So if your child is in 6th grade math, standard math, and they're crushing it, they're just doing fantastic, they have the ability to jump a pathway or move a pathway up to get to accelerated 7th grade math. Now, your child has to perform at a very high level all year, not just from one to the other, and hopefully we as teachers would catch that before the end of the school year in 6th grade, so we would give them as much input and as much kind of experience as we can in the 7th grade curriculum. So green doesn't mean it's going to happen, green means it's possible. Okay? Now let's go from 7th to 8th grade, and this is the biggest jump in terms of material content rigor because it has to be because of the end game, which is we're sending them to Peachtree Ridge High School in 9th grade, and because Peachtree Ridge High School is block scheduled, meaning their 4x4 block, it indicates your child only has a class for a semester. They don't have it for the whole year. That's kind of why things change a little bit locally here at Hull Middle School as opposed to other middle schools in this county. Because we're sending them to a non-traditional high school as the standard, as the default, we've got to make a couple of different moves here to ensure that your child is going to be successful at that level. So this is the beginning of that conversation from 7th to 8th. So let's take a look at that. If your child is in 7th grade standard math, the natural progression would be go to Algebra 1, okay? And that is the important concepts from 8th grade, so we do touch upon those concepts again, right? And it's all of the 9th grade curriculum. Yes, your child's an 8th grader, but Algebra 1 for All, or Algebra 1, is a 9th grade class. It's a high school class. So we're going to touch upon those important concepts again, and then we're going to teach all of 9th grade. Now, that is Algebra 1. That is the standard math for 8th grade. If your child is in accelerated 7th grade math, the natural progression at Hull is to get them into gifted blended Algebra 1. So you may be saying to yourself, well, wait a minute, that's the same thing as the previous class. Yes and no. Yes, in terms of how many units we cover or the content that we cover, but no, because it is a little bit faster paced and we go deeper into the rigor because of what we're going to be sending students to in 9th grade. And I'll explain a little bit more of that in a minute when I get to the 9th grade one. Now, let's go to the green arrows because there's a couple of different options here. Let's go back to standard math in 7th grade. Let's say your child is doing fantastic work in 7th grade standard math through our placement process and diagnostics, and of course your teacher's recommendation in 7th grade. Your child has the ability to jump to gifted blended Algebra 1. Now, that's not the biggest jump significantly in terms of the content being taught, but that is the biggest jump significantly in terms of the rigor, in terms of the depth, and in terms of how we prepare you for high school. No, I'm not saying that we don't prepare you in the Algebra 1 level. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that the jump there is far too big to make the rigor count over the course of a school year. So you'll see again when I get to that 9th grade, I'm going to explain that a little bit more. So that first green arrow from 7th grade standard math to gifted blended Algebra 1 is something that we've done here at Hull for the last 4 or 5 years, and it has worked very, very well. Okay. The other green jump is from accelerated 7th grade math to gifted blended accelerated Algebra 1. That right there is probably one of the biggest jumps in the middle school to high school curriculum with regards to math. There is a tremendous jump in terms of the content necessary. So for example, in 7th grade math, you're learning 7th grade material, period, end of story. All right? No matter how much of it you're doing. But in Algebra 1, accelerated Algebra 1, we get all the way into 10th grade content. So there's a 3 grade level jump in only 1 year in terms of the beginning and the end, right? So that is significant material. So the idea here at Hull is if your child is typically now, all cases are different, but it's typical that your child has a 95 average or above, class average or above, both semesters in accelerated 7th grade math. They perform at the A level on summative assessments. They get distinguished on the EOC, and they have teacher recommendation. They are going to be into accelerated Algebra 1, which is gifted blended. Now, that doesn't negate kids from getting into that class, but at the beginning of the school year, like we're approaching right now, it's important for teachers to identify where the child is going to be the most successful with the biggest level or the largest level of rigor. So even though the progression, the natural progression from 7th grade accelerated is to Algebra 1, gifted blended Algebra 1, that doesn't mean that your child is not able to get to accelerated algebra. It just means that we don't know enough of yet about what their capability is. So again, it's possible, but it's not typical that they make that jump. Now, from 8th grade to 9th grade, there's a lot of different arrows. You see a ton of arrows there, right? So let's talk about that. Algebra 1, success at the Algebra 1 level at Hull Middle School is an 80 or above. Now, if your child gets a 77 and they perform at a high pace, we can talk about that. But the reality is 99.9% of students that get an 80 or above or an 84 or above are far well prepared or well able to perform at the geometry level in 9th grade. Now, in the past years, students that have gotten C's in Algebra 1 in 8th grade will repeat the course in 9th grade. No, it's not a punishment. We just don't feel comfortable with a recommendation to make the child jump to geometry. We just don't feel comfortable with that because of the level that they're at. Geometry is 1 year ahead mathematically. Okay, so it's going to be, if they're on that pathway, it's going to stay 1 year ahead of their peers. Okay, so even though it's Algebra 1 for All in 8th grade, there is a major difference when we start sending them to high school. And again, remember, Peachtree Ridge High School is block, which means that that geometry class, they're only going to have for one semester. So from August to December or January until May. And some kids, unfortunately, don't have math the first semester of high school. They have to wait till January because of scheduling. So if we had a child that, let's say, got a 75 in Algebra 1 in the 8th grade, the chances of them not having math class until January is 50-50 almost. We don't feel comfortable recommending that. Now, I'll get to the recommendation part at the end of this video. But that doesn't mean that they can't do it. So again, in my class in the past, students that get an 80 or above in Algebra 1, I really take a hard look and see, well, what did they do in the first semester? And I may recommend them for geometry depending on what they've done, okay? If your child's in the gifted blended Algebra 1 section, the natural progression is to go to gifted blended geometry in the 9th grade. We feel very comfortable that they're prepared enough in terms of the content and the rigor and the pace to get to that geometry level. Now, gifted blended accelerated Algebra 1. That class typically goes to gifted blended accelerated geometry. Now, I teach that class here at the middle school as well, and I can tell you firsthand, that is probably the hardest math class, period, in GCPS. And the reason for that is because of the pacing, the structure, but more importantly, because of the time and year and age that your child takes that class. That class is taken as a 9th grader, and less than 1% of the time it's taken as an 8th grader. That class is very challenging for a 14 or 15-year-old child because of the pacing, because of the levels. Now, you can see on the PowerPoint, accelerated geometry gets to 11th grade content, and that's true. We get to all of 11th grade content. That's really, really challenging for kids. So now let's go back and see what the green arrows mean here. So depending on what algebra level your child is in, whether it's Algebra 1 or gifted blended, they may repeat the class, period. And that, again, is not punishment. It is just saying we don't feel super comfortable about recommending them to go to geometry. If your child is in Algebra 1, not the gifted blended section, kids have made that jump to geometry. They have to work very hard. They have to dig in. They've got to make sure that they do their assignments every day. But it is possible. I've done that before where I've recommended geometry for those kids. Now, if your child is in gifted blended accelerated Algebra 1, yeah, they might need to go to geometry instead of accelerated geometry. They may not have been able to keep up with the pace. They may not have been able to perform high enough or as high as we would like on, summative assessments or major tests. So again, not a punishment. It is just our way of saying we just don't feel comfortable with your child succeeding at that next level or succeeding at a high level at the next level because it's just so fast-paced. Now, let's talk about recommendations and I'll end this video. So I'm sorry that we're almost at 13 minutes, but I hope this was a good video for you. Teachers in 8th grade make their recommendations for your child in January. So we don't have the luxury of waiting the entire year to recommend where we think your child should go. Now, I've had parents in the past say, well, I don't really agree with your recommendation, Mr. Dramis. Can I override you? Absolutely. I'm not going to feel, and the teachers here at Hull are not going to be upset if you override our recommendations. That's what they're for. They're just our recommendations about where we think your child should go. But you're their parent or guardian, right? You know them far better than we do. So if you want to make that override, you're certainly welcome to. You do have to contact Peachtree Ridge High School to do that, and you need to set up a meeting with them. Now, whether that's virtual or in person, that's up to them because that's out of our scope as well. So again, talk to your teachers. If there's questions, my email address is at the bottom of this presentation. Please feel free to reach out to me. I want to make this as clear as possible for the community so you know exactly where your child is headed and where your child is going through middle school, but also as soon as they start the high school, okay? Thanks so much for your time, guys. Have a great day.